Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panelists, members of the press, and colleagues. Welcome to this official launch of the Global Resources Outlook 2024, released by UNEP and the International Resource Panel, which we are releasing on the sidelines of the 6th session of the UN Environment Assembly today. My name is Keisha Rukikaire. I'm the head of news and media for UNEP, and I'll be moderating this event. We have 30 minutes for this program. And our panel today is Ms. Andersen, Executive Director of UNEP. We also have Her Excellency Ms. Susana Muhamad Gonzales, Vice President of UNEA 6 and Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development for Colombia. We have Mr. Janez Potočnik, Co-Chair of the International Resource Panel. And we also have Mr. Hans Bruyninckx, one of the report's lead authors. Without further ado, I will hand the floor to Ms. Andersen for remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. And thank you for being here to cover this event, which we greatly appreciate. As you will know, that this assembly has really set a number of resolutions that look to tackle the planetary crisis, that crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and land and biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste. And a number of the resolutions which we are now seeing landing do place a very strong focus on how to start using the resources of the planet much more sustainably, more responsibly, and more in circularity, and being very mindful that there's overuse in some areas, overconsumption, and in other areas, underconsumption, certainly in terms of food and adequacy in poorer countries. So our economies, however, have for too long been built on this relentless and senseless extraction and use and dumping of resources, with this take, make, and then waste linear economy, and material and resource use has risen more than 3 times over the last 50 years and continues to grow by an average of 2.3% every year, year on year. And so the wasteful use of these precious finite materials destroys nature, in many places finite. Some will regrow like forests, but not at the speed at which we take them. But our wasteful use of these materials can destroy nature, warms the climate, pollutes our ecosystems, feeds inequalities, and quite frankly, flushes money straight down the drain. This breakthrough report, which has been authored, as you will hear, from a group, the International Resources Panel, under the direction of Janez, as well as Isabella Teixeira. They are the co-chairs for the IRP. This report shows that it is possible and even profitable to decouple economic growth from resource use and from the environmental impacts that they cause. And to be very clear, this is not about recycling alone, please. We are talking about replacing the linear growth model, this take, make, and waste model, into circular models, into systems that keep materials once extracted in use in the economy, and into rethinking how we design and how we deliver goods and services. Circularity and more sustainable and more resource-smart ways of provisioning basic services are needed in areas like housing, in areas like food, mobility, amongst others. And because we will need housing, we will need food, and we will need to move, but how can we do that without that relentless extraction? If we pay attention to this, if we create new business models, if we reduce our impacts of environmental impact, and if we slash our resource use in the wealthier countries where this linear model is prevalent and dominant, we will create space for the growth that the many countries need to be able to step into a place where they have handled poverty and fulfilled their very legitimate aspirations as part of the Sustainable Development Goals. And it will also then help reduce the profound inequalities that we see across the world. If the world follows these policies that are outlined in this report and make these shifts that the report is recommending, we could see real benefits, and not just for the environment. Growth in material use could potentially fall by 30%. We could lower energy and material demand. We could help ensure that enough minerals and metals for the energy transition without having to ravage the earth or even our oceans, a goal that is a topic of a resolution here at this assembly. Greenhouse gas emissions could be reduced by up to 80% if we get this right, and we could have a global GDP 3% larger than what is predicted today. And we could also have a fairer world with a more equitable distribution of this wealth that we must share. The bottom line is that the triple planetary crisis, driven by our insatiable and unsustainable consumption and production, essentially SDG on its head, SDG 12 on its head, is not working. And so we need to make sure that we work with nature instead of merely exploiting it, that we reduce the resource intensity for mobility, for housing, for food, for energy systems, so that we will achieve the Sustainable Development Goals for all and ultimately live on a just and livable planet. This Global Outlook report tells us what actions we need to take to achieve this goal. And we really need to study this report in some detail. Some countries are beginning to take it on board, but we need to begin, obviously, by just passing the resolutions that are on this assembly around circularity, around responsible extraction of the use of metals and minerals, so that we can leverage up the global awareness of what is possible, what is doable, and what is necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Andersen. I'll now hand the floor to Her Excellency Susana Muhamad Gonzales, Vice President of UNEA and Environment Minister for Colombia.
Thank you very much, and I am very honored to be in the launch of this report. Thank you for all the work of the scientists and the teams and institutions that put this forward. Outlook reports have been a guide for our environmental advocacy, but also in terms of the policy making in Colombia. So we will commit here to advocate for these reports to be the basis of decision making, because it's helping us to see and project scenarios to the future. And if politicians do not see the material reality of the planet, it's very difficult to continue in these abstract political negotiations, and we have to put the truth, and the truth is around the data, the information, what is happening in material reality. And I like to not only congratulate the report, but also highlight the importance that the report is calling us to rethink the metabolism of society, and that in depth tackles into the production relationships of capitalism. And this is why it is so difficult that actually, even if we have the data, the scientific reports, the underlying information is not a technical problem. It's not that we cannot grasp the reality. It's that it goes to the core of the power structures that we live in, and the way these power structures have created economic mechanisms that, as the report is saying, clearly is leaving the people that have less and the countries with less GDP has depleted their resources, but their economic well-being and the well-being of their societies is not increasing. So huge amount of resources extracted, but quality of life and well-being of those countries and nations and populations not increasing. And on the other hand, waste increasing, consumption increasing, and it talks specifically to the situation of the justice of the economic system that we have. So this will require, and my message will go especially for young people, for activists, for advocates all around the world, to really take to this report and go to the center of the power situation and advocate for those changes, and which are not easy. The energy transition is not only a technological transition. It will change and could democratize the way we produce and consume. It could create communities that participate in the economic development and sharing, but for the well-being of the majority. And it's very appealing that the report is clear that we can decouple economic growth from material use. We had a recent debate in Colombia, a very heated debate, when the Minister of Mines and Energy of that time said that we need to decrease growth. And that was interpreted as if we were going to go and live back on the cave ages and in the internal political debate, when actually we need to decrease the growth of consumption of materials. And that is decreasing growth. But we can increase growth in terms of well-being, of health, of environmental resources for a better life for all, and justice and inclusivity. So we received this report with a lot of hope and as a tool for change. And thank you for the authors for all this work.
Thanks.
Thank you, Excellency. Now, before we hear a presentation of the findings, I'm going to allow Ms. Andersen to leave. She has a pressing engagement. Thank you very much, Executive Director. Thank you. So we will now hear from Mr. Janez Potočnik, co-chair of the IRP, who's going to give us an idea of the findings, the key findings of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Keisha. First of all, I would like to thank Inger explicitly because she's not here, because that's for you, not for her. She was really supporting us, International Resource Panel and also Global Resource Outlook on the whole way. And she's really trying to do her best, if we are honest, that she would create a solid bridge between two UNEPs which are happening, one in negotiating rooms and the other outside. But why is the Global Resource Outlook 2024 so important, and why does it deserve your attention? Our consumption and production patterns, designed and also to a large extent championed by industrialized world, are wasteful and unjust. If we do not change them, we will face increasingly severe environmental impacts while not having even basic human needs met. GROW24, it's a groundbreaking scientific document, a guide, if you want, to a sustainable and just world. Like Susana was saying, it's opening many uncomfortable questions, yes. But like I tend to say many times, if you want to protect extinction of elephants in nature, you first need to extinct elephants in our rooms. So our research is showing that the unsustainable resource use is driving the triple planetary crisis. Extraction and processing of materials, everything what we extract from Earth, are driving 60% of climate impacts, if we include also land use change, over 90% of land-related biodiversity loss and water stress, and around 40% of health-related pollution impacts. All, unfortunately, see an increasing trend since our last global assessment in 2019. In total, global material use has increased by over a factor of 3 in the last 50 years, since 1970. If current trends continue, it is projected to grow from approximately 100 billion tons in 2020 to 160 billion tons in 2060. The wealthiest benefit most from resource use and are also most responsible for most environmental impacts. Meanwhile, many low-income countries still do not consume enough material to meet basic human needs. We clearly point in our report on the importance of huge existing differences among different income groups in material footprint, which includes domestic extraction and net material trade balance. IRP scientific attention is focusing on unpacking the drivers and pressures leading to the consequences we face. Our research is showing that we need a fundamental systemic shift in how we use resources, away from wasteful linear production and consumption systems towards circular, resource-efficient societies, optimizing well-being for all. to avoid severe environmental impacts, breaking the links between ever-increasing resource use, economic development, human well-being, and environmental impacts, so-called decoupling of economic and well-being growth from resource use and environmental impacts is a must. In high-income countries, absolute decoupling should be the aim, which means decreasing material use while maintaining or improving well-being outcomes. In low and some middle-income countries where additional material use is still needed to build up infrastructure and meet people's basic well-being needs, relative decoupling should be the aim. This is necessary, and it is also just. What is the major novelty of GROW24? We are simply setting the order right. Economy was invented to serve humans, and not the opposite. So we are looking at how to optimize provisioning systems, human needs, rather than maximizing the output of individual sectors. We acknowledge the usefulness of GDP, but we should be guided by well-being. We propose to focus on most resource-intensive provisioning systems, built environment, mobility, food, and energy, which represent 90% of global material demand. Focusing on human needs would allow us and incentivize cross-sector innovation and shifts to a more future-fit business models. Our approach is basically meet on a logic. We don't need car, we need mobility. You don't need light bulbs, you need light. You don't need chair on which you sit, but you want to sit, and I could continue. Any transformation, it's a major business opportunity for those who are innovative, those who dare, and those who understand the essence of the challenges ahead of us. We should simply not accept that meeting human needs should be resource intensive and stop stimulating extraction-based success and rather reward responsible, innovative, creative ways of meeting human needs. Supply-side policies, currently receiving most of the policy attention, should be complemented with demand and consumption-related policies. And resource efficiency policies should be complemented with resource sufficiency optic. Our report in a sustainability transition scenario shows pathway how we can improve environmental outcomes and raise equality. Pathway towards sustainable resource use which maintains or enhances human well-being and prevent crossing planetary boundaries is possible, but we must urgently change the direction and fix the broken compass. Last decades, attention by policymakers was given mainly to the climate change, with good reasons, but with limited success. Some facts. Global CO2 emissions were highest last year. Global surface temperatures has already increased 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial level. So we have already reached the level we have set to ourselves, the upper limit level in 2023. And the most worrying fact for me, according to IMF, fossil fuel subsidies topped $7 trillion or 71% of GDP in the year 2022. I don't know how you call it, but I call it a global hypocrisy indicator. The highest yearly figure ever. Clear indications that, my dear friends, get ready, it will get worse. Yet, costs associated with climate change are already high and growing. Many are showing a great level of solidarity with those hit by extreme weather events. But why are we ready to show solidarity only ex post, when we already face consequences and human suffering and not ex ante to avoid them? Climate change could only be effectively addressed by combining currently prevailing supply-side solutions linked to energy decarbonization with demand-side solutions related to behavioral change and decoupling we are championing, and nature-based solutions exploiting the potential of ecosystem services and environmental sinks. This was finally better understood at COP28, but it was not COP1, it was COP28. Our modeling is showing that with systemic shifts, we can mitigate growth in material use by 30% by 2060 and reduce the total global energy demand by 25% by 2060, both compared to today's levels, all consistent with the overall global decarbonization goals. So decarbonization and decoupling must go hand in hand. We need consistency among how we try to solve climate and other environmental and social targets and challenges. This would also make energy transition much easier and feasible. In a scientific work recently published, authors of the behavioral crisis driving ecological overshoot claim that climate breakdown is a symptom of ecological overshoot, which in turn is caused by the deliberate exploitation of human behavior. We needed to become mindful of the way we are being manipulated. The material footprint is dangerously under-discussed. Most climate solutions proposed so far only tackle symptoms rather than the root cause of the crisis. This, they say, leads to increasing levels of free levers of overshoot: consumption, waste, and population, where discussion of climate often centers on carbon emissions. A focus on overshoot highlights the material usage, waste output, and growth of our societies, all of which affect the Earth biospheres. All this clearly highlights the importance of the work done and presented today to you by International Resource Panel. To conclude, the strong alignment in messages coming from IPCC, IPBES, IRP, GEO, and others, all based on the most comprehensive scientific assessments, must be considered as a statement of urgency from the scientific community. We should aim for living well within planetary boundaries. We should aim for a meaningful and decent life for all. We should embrace the words and wisdom of Mahatma Gandhi: the world has enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed, and use them as an inspiration for our work and also for our actions. Equity and justice implications of resource use are critical if we are sincere in our quest for a more sustainable and just world. With decisive action and political courage, a sustainable future for all is still possible. But solutions pathway is getting narrower and steeper, and there are less and more urgent options on our policy menu than decades ago. We are indebting future generations financially and by depleting the nature. This is simply wrong. Apparently, we humans are the most intelligent species on this planet. It's high time to prove it. More than an economic or a technological choice, this is indeed a moral choice. One thing is clear: the future will be green, or there will be no future. I'm really happy that Hans is also with me, the lead author, so any questions we will try to answer collectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janez. It's not often you get moved by a scientific presentation, but that was very moving. Thank you. So we'll move to the Q&A portion of the press conference now. I'll ask the media to state your name and the outlet you represent before you ask a question. We have mics going around. I see one over there at the back.
Hello, I'm Ella Vanhanen from Finland. I'm a youth delegate. I want to ask, how do you see the future of our ecosystem? Future of our. I'm losing English. I'm sorry. Future of our economic system. What kind of changes we need to make to be actually able to lessen our resource use?
Yes, thanks for the question. Indeed, I would say that is the central element of this whole grow, because we are in fact looking at provisioning systems which have a production side and a consumption side that connect supply and demand. So that's the essence of your question, the economy. We are very clear about that. The current system has two elements that are unacceptable and untenable if we look at the future. One is that our current system is overusing natural resources, which means that they have an impact on climate and biodiversity that is not tenable and also not acceptable and completely not aligned with the global agreements that we all enthusiastically endorse, whether it's at state level or at civil society level. The other element is the distributional issue. The current system is fundamentally unjust and is not leading to development outcomes to which we also agreed in the SDGs in 2015. And by the way, already in 1992 in Agenda 21, which was, I would always say, the old version of the SDGs, if you want to. So we've been wasting a lot of time on turning this economy around. Is this possible? Yes. The economy is not following the laws of physics. It's man-made or human-made. So we have the instruments to do that. In most countries, we gather 30 to 50% of the GDP every year in taxes. We could use these taxes in a very different way. We are subsidizing economies nearly everywhere to stimulate direction and distribution. We have been doing that in environmentally harmful ways. This has been documented for decades. So we know how we can work on that. We could green tax systems. We know how to use public and private finance in a coordinated way because we've been doing it for decades on other things. So we need to use the tools that we have economically. And in my opinion, one of the foundations of any new economy, besides focusing on resource use and impacts, is to start from the social reality that we are serving. And the report is a very strong call to focus on those in the low-income countries that will need more resources to reach a decent life and to focus on distributional aspects throughout the economy. The social reality is where we will get people along. And because if you think you're leading but nobody is following, you're just taking a walk, yeah? And we don't have time to just be taking a walk. We have to go to the essence of what an economy is. It's connecting supply and demand to human needs and well-being. And that is the basic call of this report.
Thank you, Hans. We have a question over here.
Thank you very much. Diego Ferrat, Colombian News. Respectfully, I'm going to ask to the Minister, please respond it in English and in Spanish too for the Colombian media. Well, first, how is important for Colombia perspective this tool and how it could be related to the job that the Colombian ministry has been leading in the last 2 years? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think it is a matter of fairness and social justice. I agree very much that even if we can compare in between nations, we also have to see the social realities inside nations. And Colombia is one of the most unequal societies. So we are also following that pattern of a segment of the population with overconsumption and a broad base of the population that has no necessarily access to basic needs. So we had this debate on growth, and it's for sure for us economic growth is important so that we can sustain basic needs, but how are we fulfilling that growth make us to go into a deep discussion on what is the transition, what is the economic transition. Beyond the energy transition, what is the economic transition? A country that depends on export of coal and oil to part of its fiscal income and part of its balance of trade, what are the sectors of the economy that we want to reinforce? So we have decided, for example, to multiply tourism, but nature-based tourism that is developed with the communities and based on biodiversity. So in that way, it's creating a type of consumption that is not based on how much you provide to the tourists, but we call it the country of beauty. What is the intangible that we are putting out there is beauty. And beauty is what? Is biodiversity. So it creates a reinforcing cycle of care for the cultures and the biodiversity that we then value as our main economic asset. The energy transition, we have, of course, large projects for generation, but we are also working the decentralized process of energy production. People can produce and consume energy so that they can develop their own in what we call energy communities. These energy communities could become hubs of innovation. Mining, which is another critical depleting area. We are transforming the coal export mines. We are the 5th coal exporter in the world, has created a devastating effect on those regions. We have to replace that for a mining process, and we are putting forward a mining law where we're going to make mining, but it has to take care of biodiversity, and it has to be done for the energy transition, but attached to industrial change, not this loss of value where you export all the value and then you import the technology. It has to be a reindustrialization process, but in the logic of decarbonization. So these new industries have to be decarbonized. And with a very strong regional perspective, diversification of economy and well-being. I mean, I can go on and on, but there's a portfolio, we call it the transition portfolio of Colombia. And I very much thanks this report because we will be really integrating this understanding of flows and material that in a country that is 75% urbanized, so 75% of the population already live in cities, the metabolism of the cities is super wasteful and is creating high environmental impact. So there's a lot of room to work on and integrate this. So thank you for the report. I will not speak in Spanish because I'll take a lot of time, so afterwards I can give you a Spanish version.
Thank you, Excellency. Katrina, there's a question over here. I think I just have time for to squeeze in 2 more because we have another event in this room. My apologies.
Thank you so much. I'm Leila Reinhardt from the World Fair Trade Organization, which is an association of 400 or more fair trade enterprises, social enterprises. I'm here also a little bit to represent the other voices of the private sector, because one of the things that I kind of started to learn is that mainstream businesses are an extractive subject on its own, especially the ones that are having shareholders that are really pushing the company to do it as cheap as possible and to use resources, use cheap labor to have more profit. So I think that is something for me, the elephants in the room as well. So how much, I did not read it yet, of course, so I think how much is that also kind of considered, that business models are very, very important to change also the whole economic system. So to see how we can make the transformation from this kind of, to put it very bold, I know, the shareholders' capitalistic business model into social and more beneficial business models for planet and people. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Leila. We are, first of all, sometimes we have a wrong perception that in the business sector they have less kind of strategic thinking that actually is happening elsewhere. This is wrong. They have all the capacity, and they are doing that. But unfortunately, many times it goes against the current interest and current recording, everything what you have mentioned. But one thing is clear. Our report is very much betting on different kind of business systems, because we firmly believe, so if you approach to the question from the car industry perspective, but not to the question of mobility perspective, you get totally different answers. But there is where we will go, I can tell you. So get ready. That's what will happen, because it has to happen, because the alternative is basically the difficult reality which we are already talking about in our report. So business models which are very much taking into account human need in the first place and not maximizing the amount of products and services on the market, which is actually what GDP is only measuring, are absolutely the necessity. And that's why we are calling for, we do believe that GDP is an important way of measurement, but it needs to be complemented by other things which are basically leading to the well-being. and the North Star leading us should definitely be well-being and not something else. But I was absolutely clear in my opening also that any transition for those who dare, for those who are innovative, and don't want to stay in the past and optimize what is currently on the table, it's a major business opportunity.
Yes.
Any. It has always been, and it will always be. This is a serious transition. And it's not a transition only to environmentally solid and stable world. It's a transition which talks about how our economy of the future will look like, how our stability in the world will look like, how our it talks about war and peace in the future. It talks about migrations in the future. So people who are negotiating here should understand that's what is actually the core question which we are addressing. It's not just environmental. We are doing a serious thing. Unfortunately, it's not many times understood like that. But in Europe, seeing what the aggression from Russia to Ukraine and the consequences which are on the resource story, we see very clearly how resource stories are connected with all the economic and political realities following up. So it is about resources, access, use, because they are the base for your well-being. Unfortunately, they are also the base for conflicts which happened in the history. They are the base for many bad things. So it's better that we get serious.
Thank you very much. I'll take one question, but I will ask, please, that you make sure that it's a journalist. I'll ask you, Urmi, please, just to be safe. Thank you.
Urmi Goswami from the Economic Times. In the previous edition too, you mentioned the same sort of calculation, how we need to move away from this linear way of looking resource use to circular. One is how much worse off are we, and two is if you could speak to the reasons why, despite the previous edition saying making a similar pitch, but the movement seems to be limited. So if you could speak to the challenges in application.
Also, so the core reason is very simple, because we are humans. So we consider ourselves as not part of nature, but as a kind of somebody who can manipulate and extract from nature, which is a totally wrong thing. I'm actually getting allergic when I hear people and nature concepts. People and the rest of nature, yeah, but not people and nature. Because as long as economic theory, and economic theory is very clearly somehow excluding, taking all the thinking, all the theoretical concepts are based on that we are actually not part of nature. And this is the core problem, and this is what you hear basically in all those rooms. And yeah, we need always a kind of snow effect, creating a critical mass, repeating, and suddenly the change happened. Obviously, this was not the case between 2019 and 2024, but also we get a bit more clear messages from the outside that it's getting serious. So when we understand that, like it was an experience which we learned from COVID, we get serious. Yeah, but in climate change and environmental crisis, we don't yet take it seriously enough.
If I can add to that, two elements. First of all, I think it's clear that why are things not moving? Because we are dealing with very strong and often structural lock-ins. We are locked in to this model of economy. And that is because of what we tend to call political economy, where power in the economy and in politics interact. That's how decisions are made. And so I think we need to understand those lock-ins much better, make them explicit if we want to deal with them. I think the report does that at least partially from a resource perspective. The second element is that we have seen a lot of progress in a lot of ways in the last 10 years. That is the optimistic curve of transitions, what we should do more. Yeah, we are seeing a lot more renewable energy. We are seeing resource efficiency increase. We're seeing a lot of positive things. Where the real difficulty is what we should be phasing out. And I don't think we pay enough attention to what we should be phasing out, what the mechanisms of phasing out are, and how we can get rid of wasteful elements of our economic model. The problem is not that renewables are not increasing. The problem is that we're not phasing out fossil fuels. And I could give a whole host of examples. So focus on what we should be phasing out, understanding the lock-ins, and finding the winning coalition to get us over those hurdles that hold us back. And that's not easy, but it's the only way to go. And we will change either by design or by disaster, yeah? And I prefer design. And there are enough elements in here to start working with what already exists on better design.
Yes, I will add, because I really totally agree with what both of you are saying, that we have an issue of managing transition. And it is like the old systems, for example, the financial system, the rules of the game of economics is not supporting the transition. Actually, it's becoming a force against the transition. So governments and many stakeholders try to do the transition, and they are not in the system rewarded for that, but punished. And in the meantime, when we try, governments, for example, try to phase out, the consequences could be incredibly harsh. We can have really bad backlashes. In governance, for example, what's happening today with regard of the farmers' protest in Europe. So the political process of managing the transition is becoming a real issue. And in between this, that needs to be phased out, and the new that needs to come in, my fear is that what could come in is authoritarianism. And a brutal political movement of backlash. And I think this is also the political perspective of this change and the contradictions that we need to really deepen our understanding of governance for the transition to make it possible. Otherwise, I agree with everything you say.
Okay, that brings us to the conclusion of this press conference. If you have other questions, I'm hoping Hans and Janez will be sticking around a bit. Thanks very much, everybody, for your attention, and have a successful conclusion to the Assembly. Thank you.